It's a pleasure to have you, but I'll save the introduction for our very, very special guest in just a few minutes. First, I would like to thank a number of people and a number of companies that have helped make this program possible year after year. And without our sponsors, we, of course, could not continue to bring you this programming. And so I very much want to recognize our sponsors right off to get started. I would like to thank the New York State Bar Association Law, Youth, and Citizenship Program, particularly Eileen Garish, for helping us put this program together and sponsor the New York State Essay Contest. I'd like to thank the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame. It's because of the Hall of Fame that we have our very special guest here with us this morning, and so I'd like to thank them. I would like to also thank Ostrom Schaefer Electric Company, the Cattaraugus County Bank, the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, Comfort Inn, Cummins Engine, AA Vineyards, E.E. Austin and Son, Evans Discount Liquor, Hope's Windows, The Legend Group, Kurt and Joyce Seckler, Serta Mattress, Schultz Management Group, and Trucklight Incorporated for helping us sponsor this event today and making it all possible. Please give a big round of applause to our sponsors. I would also like to recognize for just a moment some very, very special young people that participated in the different essay contests and again are award winners out of those essay contests. And so I would like to first recognize the 3 essay contest winners from the New York State Bar Association Essay Contest. Would you please stand as I call your name and just remain standing? Okay, Devin Hall from Milton L. Olive Middle School, Wynandance, New York. Jacob Kinberg from Jamestown High School. Eleanor Anderson Zeich from the Wilson Foundation Academy, Rochester City School District. So please recognize these winners. Thank you. I would also like to recognize 5 very special winners from the Warren School District. The Warren School District, I think 6th grade wide was the essay contest. And we have winners from 5 different schools from the Warren School District. And so please stand when I say your name. Hannah Ruland from the Beatty Warren Middle School. Nick Collins from Russell Elementary School. Dakota Hensel from Youngsville Elementary Middle School. Lily Darling from Sugar Grove Elementary School. And Carter O'Donnell from Sheffield Area Middle High School. Please recognize and give them a round of applause. Okay, it's time to get the program started. And so to do that, I would like to turn it over to the chairman of our Young Readers program, Paul Lombardo. Please, Paul.
Good morning. Welcome to the Robert H. Jackson Center's Young Reader Series program for 2014. My name is Paul Lombardo, and I am a volunteer here at the center, and I am a member of the Education Committee here. Today, on behalf of the Jackson Center, its founder, Greg Peterson, the staff of the center, James Johnson, Deborah Pecos, Jen Champ, Carol Drake, our technology department led by Ed Tomasini, along with the board of directors and volunteers here at the Jackson Center, I'm proud to welcome author, educator, and ambassador to Major League Baseball, Sharon Robinson, to the podium in our Carl Kappa Theater. And oh yes, Mrs. Jackson is also the daughter of Jackie Robinson, who broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball along with Branch Rickey on April 15th, 1947. Today, Ms. Robinson will share her book, Jackie's 9, Jackie Robinson's Values to Live By, and how those values were so instrumental in her father's being able to accomplish a monumental change in American sports and American culture. Ms. Robinson has also authored the books Stealing Home, her memoir account of growing up in the public eye, Promises to Keep, How Jackie Robinson Changed America, which is a photographic biography for children, and also the books Safe at Home and Slam Dunk. She's taught at prestigious universities, including Yale, Columbia, Howard, and Georgetown. She served 20 years as a nurse midwife, has directed Push for Excellence, a program founded by the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and has done fundraising for the United Negro College Fund and A Better Chance. As mentioned, Ms. Robinson serves as an ambassador for Major League Baseball. She also serves on boards of directors for the Roberto Clemente Sports City Complex in Puerto Rico, the Metropolitan Opera, Urban America, and the Omnicon Diversity Committee. She received her bachelor's degree from Howard University, excuse me, and her master's degree from Columbia University. She's also received a postmaster's certificate in teaching from the School of Nursing at the University of Pennsylvania, and has honorary degrees from Monmouth College, Dowling College, and I'm very proud to say Medaille College, which happens to be my son's alma mater. We are genuinely graced by her visit today and anxiously await hearing her words. At this time, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you Sharon Robinson.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I share the joy in seeing all of all these young faces, but also thank all the teachers and parents who made it possible for you to come today. You never know what's going to happen when acts up. So I'm really showed you used all 9 values to get here. So very proud of that. We're going to have a little bit of fun today, I hope. I like to use a PowerPoint because it gives you a visual as I tell the story. My book, Jackie's 9, it was actually my first book I wrote for kids or for young people, but it's also very accessible for adults because it's all adult writing. It's based on a program that I do with Major League Baseball, and we're now in our 17th year. And I will tell you all about it because we have an essay contest with a deadline of March 15th, I believe. So I'm hoping some of you young people will be inspired today to get home and write your own stories and talk about how you're using one or more of the values to overcome your own obstacles in life. And then send it in for the essay contest because we have some great prizes with that as well. To get started off, I have to congratulate all the winners for the essay contest. I only had the opportunity to read Devin and Eleanor and Jacob's essays. So I didn't read the ones from the other schools in Pennsylvania. But what I loved about the essays that I read is, one, we have some good writers here, but also they really did start applying it to their own lives, what they had read. Eleanor, for example, asked herself some questions as she read the book, and very powerful questions, and it made me realize that she understood the material, even though I told you it's all adult writing, understood the materials and was able to apply it to her life. I know your name, I'm not going to, just one sec. Devin. Devin is 11, and she's a tall, beautiful young woman, so you have higher expectations because you think she's older. But she also pulled out the importance of self and having, sort of driving yourself towards excellence and sticking true to yourself as young people start being confronted with major challenges in your life where you have to make these decisions about which direction to go. So I love that she at 11 is already thinking like that. And Jacob, I think, will I thought he was going to say he was wanted to be a sports writer, but actually he tells me he wants to go into sports management. It's all interconnected. So I expect that I'll be seeing him around the sports world at some point. So we're going to get started. First, I wanted to talk to you very briefly about the concept of voice, because voice is something that's very important as a writer, and it's important as a reader, and it's important as you develop as young people, and also it goes right into adult life. And I started really thinking about voice when I became a writer. Because the first thing, when you get an editor, first you start scribbling, and my first book was, well, I first wrote as a professor. I wrote as a textbook, research writing, but that's very different from writing for a general public. So my first general public book was a memoir. And I decided to write about the toughest thing that I could write about, and I don't know why I did that first, except that it was something that I needed to overcome in my life. And it turned out that I just started writing, and I wrote longhand. I wrote on legal paper. I didn't tell anyone. In fact, my son knew I was working on it, and one time my mother came to visit, and he said, Mom's writing a book. That just made it worse, because then my mother goes, well, what is this book? The way my son said it. And sure enough, it was something she would prefer I didn't write about. So that made it even worse. So for years, we battled over me writing this book that I wouldn't let her read. Because I realized in my very first book that you have to write it before you start letting people read it. Because if you start letting people read it too soon, they influence your writing, or they try to influence your writing, or they just really confuse you, to tell you the truth. So even when you have an editor, they tend to let you write the book, and then they start the editing process. You discuss it, and then you write the book, and then you have a discussion. So it allows you to be your writer. But the first thing they want to know is, what voice are you going to write it in? And memoir is a personal reflection of your life, or a period in your life, a very intense period. And I wanted to write about being a teenager. I wanted to write about how hard it is to be a teenager, and how hard it is to find your voice and to get your confidence. So that's what I wrote about in Stealing Home. And while I was doing that, I had to parallel my life with my older brother, who was having a great many challenges in his life, being Jackie Robinson Jr. And, kind of showing the impact of a famous father on children finding out who they are. But voice, what I also find very interesting about voice is that how it's defined as, it can be just sounds. It can be a medium of expression, and it gives you an opportunity to express your opinions and choices and feelings and fears. If you have a strong voice, it allows you to say yes and no with conviction and values and beliefs. And each time I start a new book, I have to decide, just how strong that voice is going to be. I'll tell you about a book I'm working on right now. It's 1948, Brooklyn. Steve Satlow, who is actually a 6-year-old Jewish boy. And my dad moves in, and parents move into his neighborhood, and it's his story. But I had to decide when I'm writing a middle school novel, I did it first as a picture book. But when I go to do it as a middle school novel, my first question was voice again. It came right back to voice, because in the picture book it was fine that he was 6 years old, because it was for a younger audience. But in a middle school novel, we don't want him to be 6 years old. We want him to be reflecting back to when he's 6 years old. So I chose the book to start in 1957, when the Dodgers have decided to move from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. So at that point, Steve is, 14. And so that allowed me to have him thinking as an older person, even though as he's reflecting back on when he's 6. So voice is really important. And as you see from Jackie's 9, it wasn't one voice, and that really wasn't my decision. I had written a version of Jackie's Nine that was all very contemporary poetry, lyrics from songs, contemporary songs. It was, what else did I use in that initially? Fiction, I found, some I went to Newbery winners and, chose some really powerful fiction pieces and linked them in. And also, the images were all really contemporary athletes across the board. So as we were finishing, was a really big learning lesson for me because we were on final edits of this book, and my editor comes in with a very serious look on her face, and she said, "Sharon, I read your memoir," and I passed it on to our president of Scholastic, and she said, we don't have enough of Sharon in this book, and so I had to totally write what you have now, this version of Jackie's Nine, so it was a completely different book. And I had to stick to the same deadlines and go back and reread all these stories until I found the ones that I wanted to use in Jackie's Nine. So, sometimes voice is complicated by your editor, who's not sure, what voice she thinks will work either. So, but they were right, because the book I was writing would have been much too contemporary, where Jackie's Nine is more of a classic. So, going on to voice, I then, move right into my father's world, and the fact that I have chosen to write a number of books about him for different age groups. And given that I'm a storyteller and primarily a memoirist, and I also like to write fiction, I tell stories from my childhood that really depict who my father is. So, for example, Testing the Ice. Has anybody read Testing the Ice? Nobody's read Testing the Ice? Oh, good. Are you a teacher?
No, librarian.
A librarian, okay. Well, Testing the Ice, is one of my favorite books, and it's the story of my dad, but it's also in Jackie's Nine. So I took that story from Jackie's Nine and did it as my first picture book, and that was fascinating because you go from a favorite childhood memory to a picture book, which is all immediate. It has to be happening at that moment. And that was really fun to think again as a child with the first time my father tested the ice. And given that my editor is from New York City, she and I often, she doesn't quite get it. So she was like, "Oh, does the ice really make sounds? Do you hear air movement under the ice?" And I'm like, "Yeah, haven't you ever been around a frozen lake?" But she had not. So I had to bring in scientific references to prove to her that this phenomena does occur. It didn't just happen in my lake or in my memory, and it really happens. So that's the fun part. So as we look through, I'm going to show you now a series of photographs and actual art from some of my books, so you'll sort of understand this whole development of voice, because my dad, and I have to just see how I make this guy work. Is this it? Yeah, very good. Okay. We had a hard time getting this to you, so I'm glad it works. My dad had no voice, obviously, when he's born, because he's born in 1919 in Cairo, Georgia, and he's one of the youngest of 5, and his parents are sharecroppers. You guys know when I say sharecroppers what that means? Yes. Some of you young people, do you know? Yes. No. Yes? No? Yes. No? Okay, well, in the South, when they had slavery, period, and the slaves managed these really big farms, essentially. They were the labor force, unpaid labor force, and you've heard all about slavery and the violence associated with it. But when the slaves were freed, those farms needed a workforce. So they offered formerly enslaved people to work plots of land, and instead of paying them money, because they basically didn't have money pay them, or they weren't going to pay them. They were allowed to keep some of their crops, and then they had to then give the rest to the owners. And it was a system, another unfair system, because the sharecroppers never really caught up and never actually made any money. So they were still basically working for free, but they got to keep some of their food. So my father's parents were sharecroppers. My dad's born on this farm, and his father leaves them when my father's 6 months old, and now his mother had to raise 5 kids on this farm and also try to farm. And so obviously it was not going to work. So she decides to move her family to California, and it's a big move because all she knew was farming, all she knew was California, and she packs up and takes her kids on a train across the country. My father does actually very well in Pasadena. His brothers, he comes from a family of athletes. One of his brothers was a roller skater. I mean, he was a speed skater. Another of his brothers, Mac, was a silver medalist in the 1936 Olympics. He ran second to Jesse Owens. He lost by seconds, minute portions of seconds. But my father came along, and he was also an athlete, and he played all sports. He was good in all sports, including tennis. In fact, by the time he got to UCLA, where he actually goes to college, he was considered by the sports writer to be the best all-around athlete on the West Coast. They played on integrated teams in college. There was no, you were good, you were excellent, you got to play. There was no real racial discrimination within the college sports at UCLA. While he's at UCLA, he meets my mother. So what do you think of this picture here? So my dad looks, what do you think when you look at this picture of my dad? How does he look? He looks what? Happy? Young. Okay, all of that's true. But doesn't he look big and powerful too? Here he is, this big image of, now this comes out of my book, Promises to Keep. And the art director chose to do this enlarged picture of my father so he would be larger than life, because he is when my mother meets him, she's a freshman, and as you can tell, she's the serious nursing student. And my dad is big man on campus. So that's why they did this pose like this. So my mother was a little nervous because she thought my dad would be really arrogant because he was so well known on campus, and she didn't like arrogant. But she found out he was a very nice boy. And so they met and fell in love. My dad leaves UCLA. My mother stays on to finish her nursing program. And my dad gets drafted into the Army because it's right as World War II, United States has entered World War II. He becomes a second lieutenant, which was, again, a first, because back then the Army did not admit blacks into their officers' candidate school. But Joe Louis, who was a famous boxer, was also in the Army at the same time as my dad, and he helped push for them to start admitting blacks into officers' candidate school. My father was one of the early ones, and he was then, after he did his officers' candidate school, he got sent down to Fort Hood, Texas. And back then, Fort Hood was essentially an Army base in the middle of the desert. And they were supposed to not have segregation on the Army base, but in truth they did. So the black soldiers lived in one section of the base and the white soldiers lived in another. And the officers, black officers, had to go to a separate place for their officer club, and the white officers went to another one. So while my dad is going into town he had an injury on his knee, so he had to go into town to go to the hospital to determine whether we could be sent to Europe or not. He got on the bus. It was a Jim Crow bus. If I say Jim Crow, do you know what that means? No. Jim Crow was in the South, were a series of laws that separated black and white people from each other in all public facilities. And one of the rules was that black people on public buses sat in the back of the bus and allowed the white people to sit in the front seats. You understand? So now my father gets on a bus, a Jim Crow bus, on the Army base, and he sees someone he knows, a woman, who's sitting in the middle of the bus, and she's very light-skinned, so the bus driver assumes that she's white. My father sits down, and he's talking to this woman who he knows, and the bus driver gets mad, and he says, "Go to the back of the bus." And my father says, "No." And the bus driver and my father get into this argument. Well, my father knew his rights, because even though it was a Jim Crow bus, the law stated that while you were on the Army base, the Jim Crow laws didn't apply. So my father, when he said no, he knew that he was in the right, because they haven't left the Army base yet. So the bus driver gets very mad and pulls over in front of the MP station saying, "Arrest this man," basically for insubordination. So my father gets arrested and has to defend himself in court, and he wins the case based on the fact that they couldn't even use the bus incident, failure to move to the back of the bus as the reason why he was arrested, because now they found out that he was in the right, but they were still mad at him for not following the rules. You understand? And the rules are, if you're black in the South, you follow our rules, whether they seem to make sense or not. So my father, they say my father was insubordinate to an officer above him, a higher ranking officer. And in court, they were like, well, you took the word of a private over a second lieutenant. Therefore, my rights were also violated. So anyway, my father, they have a defense in court. My father wins, and he is not put in jail. That's what they're fighting for, not to be put in jail. And he requests and is given an honorary discharge. So when he comes out of the Army, he's a great athlete across the board. But all of the sports which he wanted to play, he wanted to play professional sports. They're all closed. All team sports are closed to black people. Do you understand that? So it isn't like you can come out of the Army and go try out for who's your team? Who's your favorite team? The what? Jammers. The Jammers, okay. So it's not like you can come out of the Army and go try out for the Jammers, because the Jammers aren't taking any black players, no matter how good they are. So my father hears about the Negro Leagues. Do you all know what the Negro Leagues were, what they were? Yeah. Okay. So he hears about the Negro Leagues, and he hears that Kansas City, which is the team that Satchel Paige is the pitcher for, he tries out for their team and gets a spot on the team and plays with them 1 year when Branch Rickey sends his scouts out to find a player to integrate the Dodgers, or Major League Baseball. And, they don't really tell you why the scouts are looking at you. They think it's because they're going to set up another Negro League team. And my father didn't want to go to another Negro League team. He wanted to, if anything, go to the majors. But they don't really trust that it's going to happen in their lifetime. So they sent out these scouts, and they come back with all their reports, just like scouts do now. If there's a great high school player in your high school, and they send scouts around to watch them play, and then they write up a report and make their recommendations. So these scouts made their recommendations, and a number of them recommended my father. Now, remember, he's only played 1 season with the Kansas City Monarchs, and he has a strong college record. But he made the All-Star game for that 1 season with Kansas City. The players who had been in the Negro Leagues a long time actually didn't think they would choose my father, because my father was actually their role model for not accepting the way things were. Buck O'Neill used to tell the story, which anybody see the movie 42? Oh, you did? Okay, now, do you remember the scene where my father's playing for the Kansas City Monarchs, and he gets off the bus when they go to put the gas at the bus station, gas station, and he just gets off to go to the bathroom? That's a true scene. And Buck O'Neill used to talk about this all the time because what Buck explained to me was the Negro Leaguers, just followed the rules and didn't get off the bus, even though they had to go to the bathroom or wanted to buy a sandwich. They just followed the rules. Where my father didn't even think about following the rules, he just did, So then he taught them that they had some power, even when there are laws that said you don't have any power, that you're powerless. So again, voice. So my father used his voice, and in this way, it was an economic voice, because he said, okay, what did he say? Take the hose out of the tank, right? So that meant that gas station would lose that sale, and it was a big sale because it was a big bus. And the gas station attendant says, okay, you can use the bathroom, but just be quick about it. So he was still trying to get his dig in. So anyway, my father plays that one season with Montreal, with Kansas City Monarchs. And while he's there, he gets scouted, and Branch Rickey says he can't make a decision until he actually has a face-to-face with Jackie Robinson. So I love this piece of art here because this is Kadir Nelson out of the book Testing the Ice. And as you can see from those faces, what do you think about those two men? Mad? Okay, what else do you see? Very, what? Tense? Tense. Very tense, yeah. Determined? Okay, both of them are determined, aren't they? Yes, very good. What else do you notice about them? They're what? Staring contest, okay. No, I guess I won't walk. I can't walk very far with this. Okay, so they're having they're staring each other down because Branch Rickey is asking oh, thank you. So Branch Rickey is asking my father. It's on? Yeah, it's on. So Branch Rickey is asking my father, are you willing? Can you do this? Can you hold back your temper? Can you not fight back with words or fists? But how did he say he could fight back? What did he suggest? Still, being the great baseball player you are. Being the great fight back by being the great baseball player you are. So, and the other thing happens, I'm going back over here. The other thing, when you look at these two men, think of they're coming at this decision from two different points in their careers. So Branch Rickey is in his late 60s. Does anybody have parents who are in their late 60s? Grandparents? Okay, yeah. They're thinking about retirement at that point, right? So he's sort of at the end of his career. So Branch Rickey's family is saying, well, why do you have to do this too? You've already brought all kinds of great innovations into baseball. You've had this great career. Why ruin it at the end by taking this big risk? And Jackie Robinson is in his mid-20s. And so he has everything to gain if he's successful, because he's at really the beginning of a dream for him. He's going to get a dream job if he's successful. So the other thing to remember about these two men at this point in the country, black men and white men did not sit down together to discuss business. It just didn't happen. So, oh, thanks. All right. So I love this. I love how Kadir drew it because he really got the intensity of this moment and the risk for each person, and how they had to really think about whether this is the right thing. So Jackie Robinson agrees to do it. And the thing for you to remember, it's again voice. So in a way, Branch Rickey is asking him to silence his voice because my father was very vocal, but hadn't developed his full voice yet. But he'd always stood out against injustice from when he was a little kid, and his mother brought them into a neighborhood that was all white in Pasadena, California, to his Army days, and to just things that happened to him as a kid in Pasadena. For example, they lived in California, and they were all great athletes, but they never learned to swim because the swimming pool was segregated. They didn't let the black kids swim in the swimming pool. And finally, they changed the law while my father was still relatively young. It wasn't a law in Pasadena, but they changed the rule. By then, it was like just the indignity of it. They used to watch the kids through a little hole in through the fence, and my father said, "Did they think we don't get hot?" Anyway, so they changed the rule, but they changed it so that the black kids could swim 1 day a week. And when they got out of the pool, they emptied it, cleaned it, and then refilled it. So even then, the messages were not positive. So my father never learned how to swim. So anyway, all right, let me move on. I've got to go back anyway. Sorry. So Jackie says yes, and he and Rachel, now in the film, it looked like my father asked my mother to marry him on the telephone, right? Yeah. Well, did you think it happened to Rachel? No. No, they had been engaged for years. But remember, in the film, he said, so part of it is drama, and part of it is truthful, because in the reality, they'd said, we won't get married until my mother says, until I've completed my nursing education, and my father has a job. So he didn't really have a good job until the Dodgers said, we're offering you this job. So, it was not an incorrect moment. It was just a slightly different moment. So anyway, this is the wedding scene. As you can see, it happened right after World War II when satin was very rare, but my grandmother insisted my mother have satin, and all the bridesmaids have satin, so it was a very big, fancy wedding. Right after the wedding, my parents set out for spring training, and as you remember the movie, my mother did go with my father that first spring training. And you kind of remember what he came up against his first years. Do you all remember all that Branch Rickey had predicted from the name calling? And it was racist name calling, so the kinds of things that would make you want to fight back, make you want to fight. They show a particularly bad scene in the movie 42 in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia was one of the worst cities. Although Syracuse, New York, we're not that far from Syracuse, are we? In Syracuse, New York, the players on the opposing team, when my father came up to bat, as he's walking into the batter's box, they threw a black cat onto the field and said, "Hey, Jackie, here's your cousin clowning around." And my father was furious, but let me show you how he got back. So you have to remember, this man had a voice. It was just played out in a different kind of way. So he got back at them by not going over there and getting into a fight and getting kicked out of the game, because then they would have said, what? We told you black and white people can't work together, right? So therefore, they wouldn't have been successful with their experiment. So what my father did was he hit into a double, and then the next batter came up, and my father came home. My father was a very fast runner. I mean, that's why he was able to steal home, as well as his timing and his study of the right moment to take off was, just very keen and accurate. So my father comes home, and as he's passing the players on the opposing team, he looks over them and he said, "I guess my cousin's happy now." So don't ever think that he didn't have ways to fight back. And it's just, you think about, ways you have to fight back in your own lives, whether you're being bullied or whether it's something hard in school that you have to deal with, you have to find a way to fight back, and just do it in a way that doesn't get you kicked out of school, or doesn't get you hurt, or doesn't have you fail that math test. So my dad plays first with the Montreal team, which is a minor league team. Remember in baseball, you start off in the minor leagues. Now, do you know who brought the whole minor leagues system into baseball? Does anybody know? Branch Rickey. He brought the farm system into baseball. So remember I told you about how he had done all these things in his career? This book I told you that I'm working on in 1948, Branch Rickey had a star outfielder named Paul Reiser. And Paul Reiser kept getting injured because the backfield wall was a hard surface. So when they come up against it, they got hurt. And so Paul Reiser had been hurt a number of times, and he was, Branch Rickey didn't want to lose him as a player. So Paul gets injured in his ankle, and so Branch offers him a year off with pay if he'll take the year to heal. And Paul says no. He was, a stubborn man and didn't listen, and he should have because it was ultimately a career-ending move on his part. But Branch Rickey said, okay, if he's going to play anyway, I've got to find a way to make this safer. So Branch Rickey actually was the first to pad the outfield wall. Now, in baseball, if you go to any stadium, they have very significant padding on the wall, so when the players run up against that wall, they're not running up against cement. But back then, Branch I think it was just foam or something, but it was still the early padding of a wall. All right, so then, so Jackie Robinson has this year with the Dodger farm team, which is Montreal. He to get in Montreal in Canada. The Canadians were very welcoming to my family and supportive of my dad and supportive of integration of baseball. By the end of the season, the Montreal team has won the championship, so they've been successful. They've been successful as an integrated team. They come up on 1947. There's still no integration in baseball, and it happens when the Dodgers, just before the season begins, the Dodgers are playing the Montreal in an exhibition game, and that's when the Dodgers announce that they've purchased my dad's contract. So my father goes on to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers for another 9 years, and I wonder who this is. You think that's my brother Jackie? No, that's me. I was born in the middle of his career, or early, somewhat 3 years after he started. I don't have to go into actual dates here. But I had two brothers, so I'm a middle child of two. I had a brother Jackie and a brother David. Again, this is before. Now we're here in this, in a facility that honors a great justice and a great attorney, a person that I am actually just learning about today, I'm embarrassed to say, now want to read more about. So one of the cases that Jackson heard was the Board versus Brown, Board of Education. So this is just to remind you that Major League Baseball integrated before the schools did, before the Army did. Okay, so now this scene. This is a famous moment in baseball. We're going to have, and I want you kids to pay very close attention, and you can decide for yourself if he's safe or if he's out, okay? So now, if I had a pointer, I would point to you every step of the way so you could actually see where the ball is, and you will see. Okay, so Jackie Robinson was known for stealing home, right? Very bold move in baseball, not done very rarely today. So here he is coming down, so to steal home, you're coming from third base to home plate, right? Everybody got the picture? So here's Jackie Robinson. Now he's probably halfway. He's a little further than halfway down. And the Dodgers are playing the Yankees in the 1955 World Series, and it's game 1. So my father is charging down the third base line, and the catcher is Yogi Berra. Now, is Yogi noticing Jackie at this point? Nope. The pitcher hasn't figured it out, and neither has the catcher, and the batters are still all ready to bat. So here's Jackie charging. Now, what else do you know about my dad's stance? Well, he was a fast runner, but he was also what? He was what? Look at his feet.
He's pigeon-toed. So, he didn't let that stop him. So he's coming down. Now, Yogi is aware, as is the pitcher, but does Yogi have the ball yet? No. Yogi does not have the ball. So you notice Yogi's hand is still empty, and he's right at home plate, right? Everybody see that? You see his empty hand? Jackie's charging in. So Jackie slides, and Yogi has the ball. Can you see the ball? Is it on touching Jackie's leg? No. The umpire calls him safe. And as you can see, Yogi Berra is screaming at the umpire. So it's actually a fun moment. Because to this day, if you see Yogi Berra, or my mother sees Yogi, the first thing they go, she goes, he's safe, and he goes, he's out. So, and they even have, like, you can go on the internet and see the same round of, and put in your own comments about whether he's safe or not. Truth is, it was not a game decider. It was the game one, and the Dodgers lost in game one to the Yankees, so it didn't change the outcome of a game. But the Dodgers went on to win the series, and that was their only year as world champions. So that's 1955. 1956, my dad retires from baseball, and as you can see from this lineup here, he retires with a significant career. One of his best years was 1949 when he's named MVP. Do you guys know what MVP stands for? Yeah, what does it stand for? Most Valuable Player. Very good. And in 1947, he was Rookie of the Year. And because that was the first time that baseball gave out a Rookie of the Year award, they now call the Rookie of the Year award the Jackie Robinson Rookie of the Year award. So my dad now retires. Anytime you have someone who is a pioneer or a first, what's important is others come after him. So when you're a pioneer, you're supposedly opening the doors and changing a way a society or a company, or in this case, Major League Baseball thinks. So if they were to be successful, Jackie Robinson would have a great year and would ultimately win the respect and camaraderie almost with his teammates, which he did. But more importantly, the other teams would start bringing in black players, and they absolutely did. And in the Dodgers' case, two of their more famous black players that came in after my dad and played with my father for the last few years was Don Newcomb, who was a pitcher, and Roy Campanella, who was a catcher. Around the same time, my family moves to our home in Stamford, Connecticut. So this is a picture of our house in the process of being built. As you can see, my younger brother Dave is fixated with the rocks, and Jackie's posing, and then my dad and my mother and I. In 5 years, a baseball player goes up before the sports writers for a decision around the Hall of Fame after 5 years. And my father's only request was that he be considered strictly on his stats and not on the fact that he broke the color barrier. And so he was judged based on that. And therefore, his original plaque didn't mention the fact he broke the color barrier. It was later edited, but that just happened in the last 5 years, maybe 6 years. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, in this picture, it's my mother and my father, but that's Branch Rickey. So a really cool thing was Branch Rickey was alive for that induction, and so was my father's mother, Mally, and my mother's mother. They all came out. So my dad spent his post-baseball years in a number of ways, and one of them was his work in the civil rights movement. And so this is actually a picture from the March on Washington. So a big change in my family happened in 1963. My father, who had been traveling south for the civil rights movement and working for Chalk Full of Nuts as a job, he came home and he said, well, actually wasn't working for Chalk in 63. But that was his career right out of baseball. But anyway, he comes home, and he says, I've been traveling south, and you guys have been integrating your school and neighborhood up here in Connecticut, but I want to find a way for us to have a family mission. And he said, I hope that you will find work that you love and always keep family as a priority. But, we as a family have to be committed to change in this country and to activism. So the first thing we did as a family was to go to the March on Washington. And this is a picture of my brother David with my father at the March on Washington. And while they're taking pictures, my mother and I are in the hospital tent because I have fainted. But we get out in time to hear the I Have a Dream speech. Shortly after, we see Dr. King at a distance, and then he actually comes to our home because we host a jazz concert at our home in Stamford, Connecticut to raise money for Dr. King. And Dr. King came, it was one of my most special moments in my life. I love this picture because this is my dad in his next uniform at Chock-full of Nuts. I think it's important to see that he was prepared to have another job, and athletes need to think about, you never know what's going to happen with your athletic career. That's why you go to college. Get prepared for something else. I love this picture because I found it this is from Promises to Keep, one of my books, and I found it in the Library of Congress. And it is a picture of my father when he was on his stump to raise money for the NAACP. My dad, the biggest battle of his life, he had a number of battles in his life, but I think he defined one of his largest personal ones was his struggle with diabetes. And this is towards the end of his life. As you can see, he aged pretty fast. He was actually 53 when he died. And he died of a heart attack. He died at home. He was still working full-time and, an active man right to the end of his life, even though he had, by that point, had some significant disabilities from the diabetes, including he was almost completely blind. What's important, remember I told you my dad had that meeting with us when we were kids at 1963 and told us that we had to have a family mission. So therefore, when he dies, we have to continue on with a legacy. So our legacy, you have to define what your legacy is after this main figure is no longer part of your family. And so my mother defined it in terms of education, and that's my mother in the yellow jacket there. She's a very, very youthful 91 and a half. She still loves this yellow jacket, still looks very good in it. And she founded the Jackie Robinson Foundation, so we have a scholarship and leadership development program where we have sponsored over, it says 1,400 here, but now we're about 1,500. And our scholars all graduate because we have this whole support system that's built into their scholarship that helps them get through. So we're very proud of their nearly 100% graduation rate. Now then, baseball, there's a legacy in baseball. So what's his legacy in baseball? Anybody tell me? Any of the kids? What do you think his legacy in baseball is? Think of one thing. Who's a Yankee fan here? So what just happened this last season? That relates to Jackie Robinson. What happened? Mariano Rivera, does that ring a bell? Oh yeah, so what was the linkage between Jackie Robinson and Mariano? Yes? Right, very good, excellent. So Mariano Rivera was in 1997 at this moment in Shea Stadium, the gentleman to he's to your left, right? He's my right? He's your right? That man right there is Commissioner Bud Selig, who I've worked for the past 17 years, and I have great respect for him. And mostly, as you're going to see, well, for a number of reasons, but he has a true love for children, so we get along really well. But in 1997, Bud Selig announced that they were retiring number 42 throughout baseball, right? So that meant the players that were wearing number 42 in honor of my dad or who were just wearing the number could no longer, well, the ones that were currently in baseball wearing the number could wear it until they retired. The players coming in, the number was retired, so they could no longer wear number 42. So you know that happens on team levels, but this was the first time they did it across baseball. And the commissioner said he did it across baseball because the impact of Jackie Robinson's integration of baseball affected all of us and changed the game forever. That's my mother, and this is who? Bill Clinton. Yeah, he had broken a foot or a knee or something that day, but he was there on his crutches. Very special moment. And what was really cool about that moment is my mother and I, we weren't sure about how the fans would respond to the announcement of the retirement of the number. So we were sort of waiting to see their response. And when Commissioner announced it, the fans in New York just jumped out of their seats, and it was like, okay, it was the right decision. So now this is a contemporary shot because all of the players are now wearing 42. So what day is it? Jackie Robinson Day on April 15th. All right. So as you'll see, this actually is very interesting how this came about because now the number is retired, so they're not supposed to wear the number, right? So Ken Griffey Jr., who was a great baseball player for a number of years, and he was playing, what was he playing for at that time? He come back to Cincinnati, I guess. He called and said, I'd like to wear number 42 on Jackie Robinson Day. And he called first for my family's permission and then for the commissioner's permission. Commissioner said yes. So it started off with just a few players. Ken was the initiator, but then other players heard about it and they wanted to do it. Until the commissioner finally said that all players, all on-field personnel will wear number 42. So has anybody been to a Major League game on Jackie Robinson Day? What did you go to, one of the Jammers game? You went to where? You went to a Yankees game. Okay, so isn't it funny to hear the announcer saying, and number 42, and everybody's 42, right? Yeah, so it's sort of a fun day. But it's a real game, and a very proud moment for the players and for my family. So this year, actually, we'll be back with the Yankees on April 15th. They usually try to alternate, try to keep it in New York, but we also do it with the Dodgers. And the Dodgers are out of town, so we're doing it with the Yankees again this year. Moving on, 9 values. So now, in 1997, as you just saw those pictures, my mother and I are going to all these ballparks and throwing out first pitches. Has anybody ever thrown out a first pitch? At a game? You have? At a game? You did one at a game? It's not as easy as it looks, right? Yeah. Okay, so you have some success and some lack of success. And some people are better about it than others. So anyway, I know my worst one was Boston. And all night long on television, they showed my ball bouncing and going into the catchers, and I thought that was most unfair. So, but I said, I am not a pitcher. Anyway, so I'm going to these different ceremonies, and the media keeps saying to me, is this just about ceremonies and ballparks? And I was like, can't be, because my parents are both activists. My father is very committed to young people. Somehow it's got to convert into something for the community. And I said it enough times, I was like, wait a minute now. Why don't I do something about that? Because I'd actually been approached by some other commissioners to consider coming into baseball, but I had a child at home and I wasn't going to travel. I couldn't travel. So it wasn't going to work. But now my son was graduating from high school. And as any mother can attest, your first instinct is to go to college with your child. So I know I tried to, when my son said he was going to UCLA, I said, go anywhere you want in the country. It's just fine with me. I'll just find a little place nearby. And so my brother had talked me out of going to college with my son. But you know what? If I had gone to college with my son probably would have gone to UCLA. So I should have stuck with my motherly instinct and said that boy still needs me nearby. Anyway, so I then said, well, if I can't go to school with him, I should get a job where I can travel so I could visit him when I wanted to. Anyway, so that was my motherly reason for getting a traveling job. But I didn't know what I would do for baseball. Here I am a nurse midwife. I've taught in universities, I'm a fan. None of that qualifies you to work for the commissioner of baseball. So we went to lunch, and I'm talking about all these ideas I've written up about how I could contribute to Major League Baseball, and they said no to all of them. And they tried to convince me to work for a team. Now, that wouldn't fit my plan, because then I'd be stationed in New York and not traveling around. So I said, no, I want to work nationally. So we were eating, and I said, oh, last week I was in a school. I said, if I go to a school to talk about my dad, I always talk about his character. Because, you all know about what a great baseball player he was, but, it was really his character that allowed him to be successful. You get that point, right, from what we've talked about? So they looked at me, and I was like, oh, you can do that for baseball. And that's how I developed this program, Breaking Barriers in Sports and Life. And it's based on these 9 values, and that's how ultimately Jackie's 9 came to be. So the values were chosen when I think about my dad on and off the field, and including him as a father. So it wasn't something that my dad taught me, like, here are these 9 values I work with. And why do you think I chose 9? I could have chosen 4 or 2 or 1. What do you think? Yeah? Very good. That's excellent. I didn't realize how much of a common denominator it was until I started working for baseball and started doing all this research. Then I saw 90 feet in the bases, 9 players, 9 positions. I mean, it all just made sense. So, yes, that's why I have 9. The fun part of this job, I get to spend time in schools and time in ballparks. I have had, over the 17 years, I've brought players into classrooms with me. And now we actually, because we're a totally national program and not just based in our major league cities, we do the Breaking Barriers program. We bring the winners to the ballpark. So this is us at a pregame ceremony with the Braves. And so when I go to the school, the winners are recognized. They get a laptop computer. They get one for the teacher if they are at least a first prize winner. They get books for the entire class, and they get T-shirts for the whole class. And then we bring them to a ballpark where they're honored. And then the grand prize winners, and this was last year's grand prize winner, and this young man's name is Luke. Luke knew nothing about baseball. He was born with cerebral palsy. Did I say last night cystic fibrosis? I don't know. I woke up this morning, I said, I think I must have said Luke had cystic fibrosis. But anyway, he had cerebral palsy. And he was told that he would never ride a bike without training wheels. And Luke wanted to be a normal, regular kid. So he wasn't going to go before his friends, at 9 and 10, riding a bike with training wheels. So he and his mother spent 2 years on a grassy hill until he learned how to ride the bike without training wheels. And then in Luke's essay, he writes about he couldn't jump rope. He couldn't get the rhythm and couldn't make the 2 things work, hand and feet. And he kept at it. He just kept trying, and he, just persisted. And he got up to 53 times. So then when he's reading his essay in front of and his dad was in the Army, so this was actually his classroom visit was at West Point. And when he's reading his essay to the whole school, he says, and now I'm up to 67 times. So that's the spirit of this little kid, and that kind of gets you the idea of the spirit of our Breaking Barriers winners. So kids learn about what a barrier obstacle is through a curriculum we do with Scholastic, and then they take the same 9 values from Jackie's 9 and apply it to their life, and then they have to talk about how they've used these values to get to the next level. And they write about everything. It can be something social. We've had a winner whose brother was killed. She wrote about grief and anger. Her brother had been killed in a drive-by, gang violence in Chicago. And he was just days before going off to the university. Turns out this family was from Ethiopia, and they had escaped war in Ethiopia, made it to the United States. Parents had raised these kids. Their First one was going off to college, and he gets killed a couple of nights before just because he's sitting in the wrong place. Okay, so I told you my love for this commissioner. And he said he's retiring this year, and I said to him, you know, my mother says you should never retire. So I heard recently there are little rumors going on that he may not retire. I'm like so happy. But anyway, this is Commissioner Seelig. And so this is one of our really interesting young women. I met her at 14. Her name is Maggie. Maggie was born with a rare neurological condition where she feels no pain. And she'd had 14 surgeries in 14 years. And she talked about coming into school she just had hip surgery. Her hips, her hip bones were literally popping out of their socket. And she was pushing them back in, which the doctors couldn't even believe because that would be so painful. But she, because of her tolerance for pain, she was able to push it back in. Eventually, they had to create a larger girth to hold in her socket. So Maggie sort of walks with an unstable girth. And she just recently had her scoliosis improved, so she's actually standing up much straighter now. She used to be curved over. But you see this girl she's very comfortable in baseball stadiums. She's a big Cincinnati Reds fan. So anyway, Maggie, I met her and I was just so impressed. So she says, I don't focus on what I can't do, I focus on what I can do, and I can write. So she became a baseball historian and a writer of about baseball. She blogged about the Cincinnati Reds. She was a Scholastic kid reporter. She did newspaper at school. So she wrote every chance she should get. She had no friends. And she was a student. So I meet Maggie. I'm just so caught up and inspired by her. And so whenever I can, I try to make sure the commissioner meets some of the kids. So he hadn't met her properly. He met her at the All-Star game when she was honored. But I said to my team at baseball, I was like, I need to bring Maggie to the World Series. And I said, I want her to meet the commissioner and take a picture with him so we can use it in our, it's always about money, so you have to justify everything you're doing. So I said, we need a picture of a commissioner with Maggie for all of our PR and everything. So they totally bought it. Tom got permission, brought Maggie. I go up to the commissioner's box, and I go in and tell him about Maggie, and he's patting his heart, and he said, oh my God. And I was like, she wouldn't want you to feel sorry for her. She's just a powerful young woman. You just wait until you meet her. So here's Maggie now. Now Maggie had told us about when she was 9 years old on Halloween, she dressed up as Pete Rose. So she's going in to meet the commissioner of baseball, and she says to me, can I bring up Pete Rose? So I looked at her because I trust her, and I was like, Maggie, all I'm going to say is it's a sensitive subject. And so I'll leave it at that. If you feel like, you want to bring it up, bring it up. As you can see, they bonded, and he just fell in love with her, and they just sat and talked. Her mother finally came up and said, what's going on? She's up here so long. And the commissioner hopped out of it and came out to meet her mother. And anyway, so the next day, the commissioner calls, and he says, I couldn't get her off my mind. I want her to work for baseball. So Maggie is now a youth reporter for MLB.com. She has full credentials. She can go to any game as a media and interview players, and it's her dream job, and she's being paid, and she's in our family, and so it's just been incredible. So as you can see, we as a family and as individual members of the family, we didn't all survive. I lost my older brother when he was 24. So his voice was silenced forever. But my younger brother is a coffee grower in Tanzania, East Africa. And so he's found a different way to use his voice, and he represents hundreds of small farmers, and they actually sell the coffee in the United States. And David has 10 children, so his voice has expanded in a different kind of way. And they're starting to come over to the United States now because they're getting all college age. But, I hope all of you will think about how you use your voice and think of voice not just in terms of your writing or your reading, but also who you are as people and how you're developing into confident young people so that you can use a strong voice and make the right decisions. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. We were hoping to have a little bit of time for questions and answers, but that's okay. We went a little bit over, but it was well worth it. And with the weather, we want to kind of make sure that Sharon gets to Buffalo for her flight to get out of some of this white stuff and back into some sunshine that she's so used to. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Sharon for sharing her words with us today, some of her family history, and of course, the amazing story of her father. Please, one more time, help me thank her with a round of applause.
Can I close? Okay. Before you depart, I'm going to ask Sharon to take that center seat right there, and we want to get a picture of Sharon looking up at this wonderful crowd. You turn the lights up, please. Okay.
If all of you got your book, hold your book up right here.
There you go. Can these lights? They're looking down. They might glare it.
Okay, we ready? 1, 2, and 3. We better do one more.
Okay, now before you get up, I think with this phenomenal attendance and response, I understand that we ran out of books. If you didn't get a book, Carol is going to be outside there. Please stop and give Carol your name and your address, and we will get you a book. Finally, would everyone please allow the Warren students to depart the auditorium first, because they have to go get on their bus. And so if you'd allow the Warden students to depart, and then the rest of us can. Thank you very much for coming.